Hey everybody, this is the week 3 recap for the golf fitness class, and I'm just going to cover some key points that we talked about on Monday and just go through some of the key principles I want you guys to know. This is a refresher for all the people that came, and for those who could not make it, I hope to hit all the major points that we talked about. Okay, so really simply, what were the big takeaways in week 3's class? Well, the first and most important point was the ability that our pelvis has to tilt, rotate, and side bend, right? We have 3 things that we hit on: tilting, side bending, and rotating. And in the golf swing, you see all 3 of those. And in one of those first slides in the PowerPoint, you can reference the freeze frame I put together for Tiger, and you can see each of the actions of the tilting. So right here are my innominate bones. Refer to the anatomy slides if you want to know what those are, but that's just your big pelvic bones. They tilt. Okay, these are my pelvis bones here. They tilt, they side bend, and they rotate. Okay, tilting, side bending, side bending here, and rotating. Okay, we have all 3 of those actions that the pelvis can achieve. Now, in exercise, what are some of the ways that we can achieve this? Well, we talked about this in class, but we can split our stance. If I'm splitting my stance and I'm shifting weight onto one leg, this is my left leg, onto one leg relative to the other, my pelvis on the left side here has to tilt this way and kind of open up that way. So already I'm getting some sort of dissociation, which is what we talk a lot about in the class. What we did talk a lot about in the class on Monday, okay? Operating from a split stance is a great way to get some of that dissociation, get some of that tilting action in the pelvis, okay? Another thing that we kind of touched on briefly, but we're going to cover in the homework, is this action of a side bend. And a good exercise we can do that is, where we can achieve this, is a windmill, where you have an object, dumbbell, kettlebell, anything, a sandbag, and you're just rotating, okay? I'm rotating with an object overhead into my pelvis this way. So you're going to get some of that rotating action of the pelvis that we talked about this way. Obviously in the backswing and downswing, you see that action, the rotating action of the pelvis, okay? We can achieve that in an exercise like a windmill. And the side bending, you can do stuff such as I call these QL side bends. You have a host of muscles in your back, one of them being the quadratus lumborum, the QL, and through side bending movements like this, where you're taking a weight or a load and you're bending laterally to the side, you can target that group of muscles, and that's great to protect your lower back, build that abdominal musculature with that side bending action. That's great for any excess sitting that we do throughout the day to kind of combat that and prevent any sort of low back tweaks, anything like that. So anyways, first major point is the pelvis should be able to tilt, side bend, rotate. That's major. You'll find that all throughout the slides. You'll kind of hear me talk about that there. The other thing I want to hit on is the posture stack. We talked about this a lot in class, so I just want to walk through what the posture stack looks like in an exercise. Okay, so ideally you'd have your shoes off and you'd be barefoot, and I want you, kind of like we talked about in the first class, right? All of these feed onto one another. You can probably start to gather that. You're just going to tuck and roll. You're in barefoot. You're operating without shoes here. You're without shoes and socks. You're on your bare feet and you're sensing the ground, right? We talked about the pressure. I'm sensing the ground, the weight distribution as I stand naturally. Okay, I'm standing naturally. Where do I sense the weight? If it's in the midfoot, that's great. If you're like me and you feel it a lot in the forefoot, because I possess, or I live in that position of anterior pelvic tilt, which we'll discuss here in a second, we can combat that with the posture stack. So first step, we're going to feel the pressure in our feet. Where are we? Okay, we're going to take our hands and we're just going to tuck and roll our pelvis. Okay, so I'm pushing it out, I'm tucking it in. You're going to do about 10 of these and try and find that position of neutrality where I'm not squeezing my butt and I'm not poking it way out like this. So somewhere in the middle is where I want to be, okay? From here, we're just going to soften our knees a little bit and just reach. And I'm reaching because I want to build that natural curvature in the spine. We talked a lot about this in class. A lot of us like to do this thing. We were told, and it's such a miscue, to pull your shoulders back and down. When we pull our shoulders back and down, you're automatically going into that anterior pelvic tilt, which is when your rib cage flares out. You get this massive, you get a ton of shortness and tightness in your lower back. You can't operate, or you can't rotate. You can't hit a golf ball from this position. You can't rotate in this position. Imagine just kind of pulling your shoulders back and down and then rotating. You can't rotate as effectively as when your shoulders have that natural flexion. That's why you see all the shoulders when they're, or all the golfers when they're addressing the ball. Look at their mid-back. They'll have this natural curvature in their thoracic spine, right? You see that at the skeleton model. I don't know if you guys, I have a bigger one, but I just cannot find it. You have a natural curvature, this S curvature in your mid-back, and it allows for your shoulder blades to sit on the rib cage. So imagine if my rib cage was poked out always, all the time. It would be more difficult for your shoulder blades to glide on the rib cage because they would flare up. The rib cage would flare up like this. It would be tough for the shoulder blade to sit on the rib cage, okay? We'll talk about that relationship between the shoulder blade and the arm in week 4. But for the purpose of this week 3 highlight, all I want you to know is that we innately possess this flexion in the upper mid-back, okay? And the posture stack, just playing around with that exercise, the full gambit, right? Where you're tucking and rolling your pelvis, you're reaching forward to build that natural curvature in the spine, and just kind of playing around with that, getting back to neutral, and then with that, doing all the exercises in your homework, do the posture stack before. Get to neutral. Feel the difference between where you're operating in now to neutral. Is there a big gap? Is it not that difficult? Is it tough to get that? Is it tough to tilt your pelvis, right? And we talked about in the class and in your homework, you're gonna see different movements like the cat-cow, the pelvis disassociation on the ground. Those exercises are a way for you to tuck and roll your pelvis. Maybe that's tough for you, so you might need more practice and repeated repetition of this, okay? So that's the second thing we talked about, is the posture stack. And then the big one that we kind of touched on briefly, but I want to touch on right now, is the breathing, right? This concept of pressurization. I think this is one of the most misunderstood and non-talked about topics as it pertains to rotation that there is. And that is our ability to pressurize our posterior rib cage. In order to rotate effectively, our spine doesn't do that rotation. It's breath, it's pressure. So we need to pressurize our posterior rib cage in order to rotate. So in order to do that, we have to have the proper posture stack. If we don't, as an example, if I'm operating in this position of anterior pelvic tilt, I get the butt poking out, my chest is up. If I breathe this way, down and in. I can't get air into my back because everything is so tight. It's so restricted. And the gas travels to the area of least resistance, which would be that way, down and in. So if I can get back to neutral, it's much easier, as I take a breath there, it's much easier to fill up that posterior capacity, right? There's the back cavity. Capacity is the wrong word. Cavity, that posterior cavity in the back. It's much easier to fill air into that posterior cavity. And if I have air and pressure in there, bingo, I can rotate, okay? That is such a misunderstood point that when we talk about rotation is being able to properly breathe into our back, right? And through that, I want you guys to understand that in order to do that, you need to have that flexion in your back. If I'm like a ramrod and I'm super stiff in the spine, this is my spine, I'm super stiff, there's no way in hell I'm able to get air back there. So just play around with different exercises where you're building that flexion, right? And there's a difference. It's all relative, right? We talked about it's a continuum. There's a spectrum. You don't want to be like this, and you don't want to be like that. You want to find the neutral. So just kind of inviting a little bit of that flexion and working on deep inhales and exhales. 5-second inhale through the nose. Pause. 5-second exhale through the mouth, getting all of that air out, different breathing tactics like that will allow you to kick on the right musculatures, right? As you're breathing out, you should be able to feel your side abs and your intercostals, the full gambit in your midline working to expel the air out, okay? So those are the 3 big things we hit on. If that is still unclear, please come talk to me about that. That's such a key point that I wanted to bring up. And I know we kind of ran out of time in Monday's class, so I wanted to just unpack that a little bit further here. So that's all for today. I just wanted to hit those 3 points on the highlight video. If you want to come find me at the fitness center and talk through some of these things, I'll be there for the rest of the week in the mornings up until noon. And then if not, we'll see you on Monday. Look for the homework in that email, same sort of thing. I know I'm getting this out to you guys a couple days late. Just get to the homework as best you can, 2 to 3 rounds. Most times we're doing 10 repetitions of the exercises, but do those. Let me know how it goes, and we will see you guys on Monday. Cannot believe it's already week 4. Week 4 is, like I kind of previewed earlier, is the relationship between your scapula, your shoulder blade, and your humerus. There's a scapulo-humeral relationship, and we're going to talk a lot about that. We're going to talk about upper body exercises. We're going to get into the medicine ball and power production and rotation, all that good stuff. So I hope you guys have a great rest of the week. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions, and we'll see you Monday. All right, everybody, take care.